They said the mansion was my new home, a place of warmth and trust. But trust started to crumble the night Lily, my stepdaughter, pulled me aside, her voice barely a whisper. "They're taking your jewelry tonight." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just smiled, because I'd been sensing cracks beneath their perfect smiles for weeks. That night, I placed hidden cameras in every corner of my room, every angle covered. I didn't know what I'd find, but I knew one thing for sure. In this house, the most dangerous enemy isn't a stranger. It's family. The first week in the mansion felt like stepping into a fairy tale I'd never dared to imagine. Every hallway smelled faintly of lavender. Every piece of marble shone like it had been polished by hand. Margaret, my mother-in-law, welcomed me with open arms, her voice smooth as silk. "Emily, you're part of this family now," she said, the words warm but her eyes carefully guarded. Lily, my stepdaughter, was polite in that practiced way children of wealthy families are taught to be. She smiled often, tucking her hair behind her ear, her every movement elegant yet slightly rehearsed. I chalked it up to shyness, but something in her eyes suggested she was always watching, always weighing me. It was easy to be swept up in the perfection. Afternoon teas in the rose garden, dinners under the crystal chandelier, it all felt meticulously curated, like I'd stepped into someone's Instagram version of reality. I almost believed it was genuine, until the small things began to shift. The first was my favorite earring, one of a pair I'd worn for years. I'd left it in the small dish by my vanity after tea with Margaret and Lily. That evening, it was gone. I searched the carpet, my purse, even the bathroom sink. It had simply vanished. When I asked Margaret about it casually over dinner, she tilted her head with a faint smile. "Perhaps you misplaced it, dear. These old houses have a way of swallowing little treasures." Her tone was light, but something in her glance at Lily made me pause. Lily looked down at her plate, her fork clinking softly against china. It could have been nothing, but I'd learned long ago that nothing often meant more than it seemed. That night, as I passed Lily's room on my way to bed, I heard her voice, barely a whisper, through the door. "Maybe Mom's worried if she sees something." The words froze me in place. I waited for more, but there was only silence. I told myself I was imagining it, but deep down I knew better. The next morning, I began to observe more quietly. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I simply watched. Margaret continued her polished hospitality, but I noticed the way her compliments were always just shy of sincere. The way her eyes lingered a beat too long on my jewelry when I wore it to dinner. Lily's smiles felt more like signals than warmth, like she was silently trying to tell me something but didn't dare. I decided I wouldn't wait for another piece to vanish. I bought a set of miniature cameras, sleek, discreet, no bigger than the tip of my finger. That evening, while everyone was at the weekly wordy dinner, I set to work. One camera went inside the ornate jewelry box on my dresser, its lens peeking through the carved floral pattern. Another nestled in the crown molding above my wardrobe. A third, disguised as a decorative brooch, sat on my vanity. When I was done, I stepped back and looked at the room. To anyone else, it was untouched. To me, it was now a stage. And every stage needs an audience. I became quieter in the days that followed. I stopped wearing most of my jewelry, keeping it in the box where the cameras had the best view. I let Margaret and Lily see me as comfortable, distracted, maybe even a little careless. People are bold when they think you're not looking. A week later, I got my first glimpse of the truth. It was just after sunset, the house bathed in soft golden light. I'd stepped out for a short walk in the garden, leaving my phone inside recording the live feed from the cameras. When I returned, I went straight to my room and checked the footage. At first, nothing, just the stillness of the room. Then a shadow crossed the edge of the frame. A figure stepped closer to the jewelry box. My breath caught as I leaned in. The camera picked up the faint click of the lock, the lid slowly lifting. The figure bent forward, careful, deliberate. The angle caught only part of her face, soft curls pinned back, a silk sleeve brushing against the edge of the dresser. On her feet, delicate heels tapped lightly on the hardwood. For a moment, I thought of Lily, but the steps, they were too light for her. My pulse slowed as realization spread like cold water in my veins. The shoes, the exact pair Margaret wore to Sunday dinner. The camera froze on the image of her hand hovering over my jewelry, fingers pausing for just a second, as if savoring the moment, before the recording ended. I closed my laptop slowly, the weight of the truth settling over me. It wasn't just about a missing earring. It wasn't even about the jewelry. It was about the game they were playing. And for the first time, I understood the rules. The morning after I saw Margaret's hand in my jewelry box, I decided I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. You don't call out the fox while it's still circling the hen house. You let it think the gate is still open. So I became softer. I offered to help Margaret arrange flowers for the dining room, even though I had no interest in chrysanthemums. I volunteered to set the table, to fold napkins in the delicate swan shapes she loved. I even asked her for recipes, as though I needed her guidance. Margaret seemed pleased, her smile smooth but shallow. "Emily, you're learning," she said, voice dripping with that sweet approval that feels like a leash. Evelyn, my sister-in-law, began stopping by more often. At first, she only lingered during lunches, but soon she was helping Margaret with household accounts, keeping her voice low whenever I entered the room. I could almost hear the subtext of their whispers. "She's comfortable now. She trusts us. Soon we'll have what we need." Lily, however, grew quieter. She still smiled when our eyes met, but there was something strained behind it. One afternoon, as I was wiping down the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "There's something Mom and Aunt Evelyn don't want you to know." My fingers tightened around the cloth. I didn't reply, not immediately. If she was warning me, it meant she was watching too, and I needed her to keep watching. That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I pulled up the latest camera footage. I started with the jewelry box feed. Margaret again, this time lifting out a necklace I hadn't worn since the wedding. She held it up to the light, admiring it for several seconds before placing it into a small velvet pouch. Then I switched to the wardrobe camera. Evelyn appeared, moving with a confidence that suggested she'd done this before. She wasn't just glancing around, she was searching. Her hands went through my silk scarves, my travel cases, even my drawers of letters. When she found nothing, she muttered something sharp under her breath, almost like frustration that I hadn't made it easier. But the most surprising footage came from the brooch camera on my vanity. Evelyn and Margaret together, leaning in close, speaking in hushed tones. "This will cover the debt," Margaret whispered. "And the rest?" Evelyn's tone was clipped. "He'll handle it," Margaret replied, her hand gesturing as if to wave away the question. The next file answered who he was. The hallway camera caught Margaret in a silk robe, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, the necklace first," she said, voice lower than usual. "You'll get the earrings next week. Just make sure it's discreet. We can't have interruptions." Her tone was sharper now, less like the gracious matriarch she played for the family, more like a businesswoman making a dangerous deal. I saved the clips, each one labeled and backed up to an encrypted drive. I wasn't just collecting evidence for my own sake anymore. I was building a wall, one they wouldn't see until it surrounded them completely. Still, I needed more, a conversation in their own words, unguarded. So I installed a new device, a tiny microphone tucked into the base of the antique clock in the sitting room. That's where Margaret liked to take her calls, assuming the thick curtains gave her privacy. 2 nights later, the clock's audio file lit up on my phone. Her voice came through clearly, sharper than I'd ever heard in person. "No delays, Thomas. You promised me this would be handled quickly. The necklace is already gone. Next week we'll have the brooch and then—" She hesitated as though aware of her own boldness. "Then she'll be easier to manage. No assets, no fight." Thomas's voice was muffled but deep. "You'll have everything by the end of the month. Just make sure she doesn't suspect." Margaret's laugh was quiet, almost affectionate. "Oh, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's too busy trying to impress me." I listened to the recording twice, my pulse steady, my jaw set. This wasn't just about theft, it was about control. They wanted me dependent, cornered, unable to defend myself. I closed the audio file and leaned back, the faint tick of the clock in my memory now sounding like a countdown. They thought I was weak. They thought I was blind. But I wasn't just collecting evidence. I was loading every weapon I'd need for when the moment came. It started with an invitation. I asked Margaret, Evelyn, and even my husband to join me for a private family dinner. I told them I wanted to celebrate our future together. Margaret's eyes sparkled in that way people's do when they think they're already winning. Evelyn looked suspicious but intrigued. My husband, as usual, simply nodded. I chose the dining room carefully, one of the few places in the mansion where the atmosphere still felt mine. The table was set with gold-rimmed china, candles casting a flattering glow over the walls. Beside each plate, I placed an envelope sealed in cream paper. After the first course, I suggested we look at the wedding album. "It's been such a whirlwind," I said softly. "I thought it would be nice to remember how it all began." Margaret smiled graciously, leaning closer to the album as if she were in a magazine spread. Evelyn flipped through the pages without much interest, but her attention wasn't the point. What mattered was that everyone was distracted, because while the laughter and stories filled the room, I had already taken care of the more important task earlier that day. The safe in my dressing room, shared space for valuable items, no longer opened with the same combination. The code had been changed to one only I knew. Anything inside, including my jewelry, was now untouchable to anyone else in the house. But that was just one layer. I had also spent the afternoon at my lawyer's office, finalizing an insurance policy that covered every piece of jewelry and personal asset I owned. It was all now registered under my name alone. If anything disappeared, the payout would go directly to me. As the dessert arrived, I handed out the envelopes. Inside each one was a card printed with delicate script, a gift for memories, and more. Margaret's eyebrows lifted. "How thoughtful, Emily." I smiled, saying nothing. Some gifts don't need to be explained right away. That night, I watched them leave the dining room, each one holding their envelope. I could almost see the curiosity tugging at their thoughts. Within days, the house's rhythm changed. Margaret and Evelyn began spending more time together, away from the rest of us. They whispered over tea, their glances toward me, sharper, calculating. And then it happened. I saw them on camera, moving through my room while I was out on errands. They opened drawers, checked the safe, only to find it wouldn't open. Evelyn cursed under her breath. Margaret, ever composed, placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. "We'll find another way," she said. I watched this from my laptop in the cafe across town, sipping tea as though I had no idea my room was being searched. Over the next week, their frustration grew. More attempts, more failures. It didn't matter. Every move they made was recorded, every conversation saved. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. While they plotted, I quietly froze access to several joint accounts they assumed they could dip into. I arranged for certain assets to be transferred into secured investments under my control. The house of cards they'd been building was starting to tremble. When Evelyn complained to Margaret that some of their plans weren't adding up, Margaret brushed it off. "Don't worry," she said. "She's too naive to notice." I almost laughed out loud. A few nights later, I asked my lawyer to stop by. Over tea in the study, I handed him a folder containing the footage, audio, and transaction records. "Just in case things escalate," I told him. "You've built quite a case," he said, impressed. "They won't have much room to deny anything." "Good," I replied. "I'm not in a hurry, but when the time comes, I want this to be airtight." Later that evening, I returned to my room. A message blinked on my phone, an encrypted text from my lawyer. They won't have any room left to deny it. I sat on the edge of my bed, the chandelier casting fractured light across the room. The game wasn't over yet, but the board was mine. The invitation was brief, almost cold. Family meeting, living room, 6 p.m., attendance required. When they arrived, the atmosphere was electric with unease. Margaret came in first, her posture rigid, pearls perfectly aligned at her collarbone. Evelyn followed, eyes darting, lips pressed into a tight line. My husband walked in last, glancing between us like a man sensing a storm, but unsure where the lightning would strike. The lawyer stood beside me, laptop open on the coffee table. A large flat screen was positioned behind us, the remote in my hand. "Thank you all for coming," I began. My voice was calm, deliberate. "I've been keeping a few things to myself, things that affect this family." Margaret gave a polite smile, her tone laced with condescension. "Emily, dear, we don't need to make a fuss over small misunderstandings." I pressed play. The first video rolled, Margaret opening my jewelry box, her hand hovering before slipping my necklace into a velvet pouch. Evelyn's voice came from the background, low but unmistakable. "This will cover the debt." The next clip showed Evelyn rifling through my wardrobe, muttering when she found nothing. Finally, the audio file from the sitting room played. Margaret's voice, sharper than I'd ever heard in person. "She'll be easier to manage. No assets, no fight." Margaret's composure cracked. That's taken out of context," she stammered, her voice trembling. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, eyes flicking to the lawyer. My husband's gaze moved from the screen to his mother, then to me. He looked stricken, caught between loyalty and truth. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steady. "This is theft. This is fraud, and it's all documented." Margaret's eyes welled up with tears. "Emily, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. The lawyer cleared his throat, his tone crisp. "The evidence is comprehensive. The lawsuit will be filed immediately." Silence settled over the room like ash. Margaret buried her face in her hands. Evelyn opened her mouth, but no words came. My husband stared at the floor, the weight of his family's betrayal pressing down on him. "Today," the lawyer continued, "the papers will be served." The legal process unfolded faster than I expected. With the evidence airtight, the negotiations left them little room to maneuver. Within weeks, the settlement was finalized. I retained a substantial portion of the assets, including investments they'd assumed I knew nothing about. Margaret and Evelyn were forced to return what they had taken and pay damages. More significantly, their reputations unraveled. Friends withdrew, business partners hesitated. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I left the mansion quietly, moving to a city 3 hours away. My new apartment was smaller, but it was mine. The air felt lighter without the constant hum of deceit. It didn't take long before I began building again, not just for myself. I launched a boutique investment firm focused on women recovering from financial betrayal. The work was personal. Every contract I drafted, every meeting I held, felt like a reclamation of power, not just for me, but for anyone who'd been told they were helpless. Meanwhile, the investigation into Margaret and Evelyn's dealings deepened. Their names appeared in headlines alongside words like fraud and misappropriation. The family's once polished image was tarnished beyond repair. I told myself I didn't care, but there was a grim satisfaction in knowing the truth had finally eclipsed the facade. One evening, as I was reviewing a proposal in my new office, my phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "There's something else you need to know." I stared at the screen, a familiar chill settling over me, because, in my experience, something else was never small. Winning felt nothing like I thought it would. The legal victory had been decisive, the financial settlement significant. My name was intact, my assets secure. Yet the quiet that followed wasn't the peace I'd imagined. It was hollow. There was no family waiting at home, no shared laughter over dinner. The silence was heavier than the battles I'd fought. In the early weeks at my new firm, I buried myself in work. Contracts, investment proposals, client meetings, all meticulously arranged to keep my mind from drifting back to the mansion. But in the rare moments of stillness, a question gnawed at me. Was this victory worth the emptiness? One afternoon as I left the office, my phone rang. Lily's name lit the screen. Her voice was hesitant, softer than usual. I need to tell you something about why Mom did what she did. I listened in silence as she explained. It wasn't just greed, it was pressure. Her father, Margaret's ex-husband, had been drowning in debt. He'd reached out to Margaret, urging her to secure quick money to cover his losses. The jewelry had been the easiest target. I didn't know how to tell you, Lily said quietly. I thought if you hated her less, it might help. Her loyalty surprised me. Even after everything, she still wanted to protect her mother in some small way. I don't hate her, I said after a pause, but trust isn't something I can hand back. There was silence on the line before Lily spoke again. I want to stay in touch, if that's okay. It was more than okay. In the weeks that followed, Lily visited my office a few times, her interest in finance more than polite curiosity. I offered to sponsor her education, cover her tuition, even set up a trust to help her live independently from her parents' chaos. You don't have to do this, she told me one afternoon. I know, I replied, but I want to. Sometimes helping someone start fresh is the only way to stop history from repeating. Still, the emptiness lingered. Every time I looked around my office, every time I signed a contract, the weight of isolation pressed in. It was during one of those long evenings alone that I began digging deeper into the financial patterns surrounding Margaret's ex-husband. His debts weren't just bad luck. They were a pattern. Investments gone wrong, businesses left half-finished, loans shuffled around to cover old ones. And then there it was. A wire transfer, small enough to slip under scrutiny, routed through an account Lily had access to. He hadn't stopped. I invited Lily to my office, careful with my tone. There's something I need to show you, I said, sliding the document across my desk. Her face went pale. He said it was just to help with bills. Lily, I said gently, helping someone doesn't mean letting them use you, especially when it puts you at risk. She swallowed hard, guilt and confusion battling across her expression. I don't want you to think I can't trust you, I continued, but I need you to understand the difference between love and leverage. He's using your trust to keep himself afloat, and it will sink you if you let it. We sat in silence for a long moment. She nodded finally, her voice barely above a whisper. What do I do? You start by protecting yourself, I said, and I'll help. Within a month, I diverted a portion of my settlement funds to create something new, a foundation for young people who'd been financially exploited by their own families. The trust would operate quietly at first, but its mission was clear: to break the cycle before it began. The decision cost me. It meant cutting back on certain investments, adjusting my personal budget. But for the first time since leaving the mansion, I felt the faint echo of something that resembled peace. Lily visited more often, helping at the foundation, her confidence growing. There was a light in her I hadn't seen before, a freedom that came from knowing she had a choice in her own future. One evening, as we closed the office together, she lingered by the door. Emily? Yes? Her eyes searched mine. Do you think you'll ever forgive my mom? The question caught me off guard. I thought of Margaret, the carefully composed smiles, the sharp whispers in the sitting room, the moment her face crumbled as the evidence played. Forgiveness wasn't something I'd planned for. I don't know, I admitted. But I know this. Forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means letting go of the weight someone left with you. I'm still figuring out how to do that. Lily nodded, as if she understood more than I expected. She didn't press me further. As she left, I locked the door behind her, the quiet settling again, but this time it didn't feel quite as heavy. Running the firm became more than just business. It became a mission. Every morning I arrived before the rest of the team, the skyline still brushed in silver light. The office was quiet, humming with the steady promise of work yet to begin. Lily was usually there soon after, a latte in one hand and a stack of files in the other. She'd adapted quickly, learning how investments worked, how to negotiate, and more importantly, how to recognize the warning signs of manipulation in financial agreements. Watching her grow reminded me of something I'd nearly forgotten. Strength doesn't always come from winning battles. Sometimes it comes from choosing the right ones. Our clients came from all walks of life. Women who'd been quietly erased from their own accounts, mothers who'd trusted spouses with everything, daughters who'd signed papers they didn't understand. Each story was different, but the thread was the same: betrayal wrapped in love. And each time we helped someone take back control, I felt another piece of myself settle. Betrayal had shattered me, but it had also awakened something unbreakable. It was late one evening, after the office had emptied, when my phone lit up on the desk. The name made me pause. It was my ex-husband. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. His voice was tentative. "Emily, can we talk?" 100 memories pressed at the edges of my mind. The wedding, the dinners, the nights I sat alone while he ignored the subtle wars brewing in his family. "I don't think we have anything left to say," I replied carefully. "It's not about them," he said quickly. "It's about you, about what happened. I didn't see it then, but I should have. I should have protected you." The admission surprised me, but it didn't change the truth. "Seeing it now doesn't undo what happened," I said. There was a long pause on the line. "I know, I needed you to know I'm sorry." Then I ended the call without anger, but without promise either. Some doors don't need to be slammed, they simply stay closed. Months later, the foundation was ready. We called it the Phoenix Fund, a place where women and young people could find resources, legal support, and financial education after being betrayed by the people closest to them. The launch event was simple but powerful. Clients, partners, and supporters filled the small auditorium. I spoke briefly about the importance of taking control, about how freedom wasn't just financial, it was emotional. Then I introduced Lily. She stepped onto the stage in a tailored suit, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. For a long time, I thought family was something you had to accept exactly as it was, no matter the cost. She began, but I learned that sometimes you have to choose which parts of family to keep and which parts to let go of. Her speech was raw, honest. She spoke about growing up in a house where appearances mattered more than truth, about watching her mother make choices that hurt others, and about finding someone who refused to let betrayal define her. By the time she finished, the room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then came the applause, long, warm, and real. After the event, donors approached us with offers of support. Women shared their own stories, some quietly, others openly. For the first time, I felt the foundation wasn't just an idea, it was alive. Lily and I walked out together into the evening air. "You did well," I told her. She smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." The weeks that followed were busy. The Phoenix Fund took on its first major case, securing the financial freedom of a woman who'd been locked out of her accounts by her own parents. Each win felt like a victory that reached further than just one client. It felt like undoing a little bit of the damage people like Margaret and Evelyn had caused. One evening, after the last client had left, I stood in my office, the city lights spilling in through the glass. I caught my reflection in the window, and for a moment it felt like I was looking at someone I'd only just met. This version of me wasn't the woman who walked into the mansion believing in perfect families. She wasn't the woman who quietly endured whispers and missing jewelry. She was someone forged in fire, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. I whispered to my reflection, the words a quiet promise to myself, losing a family to gain freedom, and a new family. Because that was the truth. The family I'd lost had been built on illusions. The one I had now, with Lily, with the women we helped, was built on something stronger, and that was worth everything.